Well, thank you for clicking on this video, guys. We have not put out a video for a long time. In fact, we just got done filming a video on COVID-19 and how we can use the situation to become closer to God. And that was fun. I thought, you know what? Here it is Easter. It's Easter. It's about 3 o'clock that we're recording this, and I want to talk just a little bit about the resurrection. We listened to our service this morning, Beth and I did, and I was so hoping that our pastor would put in some type of apologetics into the sermon to tell us, hey, the resurrection, it's a pretty remarkable claim that a dead man came back to life. So why in the world should I believe it? Why should you believe it? So many times when in fact, not about 100. Well, I remember one time in one church where a minister spent a little bit of time on is it reasonable to even believe this? Other than that, it seems like they come from the vantage point of, okay, we're just taking for granted that you believe the Bible's true. We're just taking for granted that you believe in the resurrection, and then we're going to deal with everything after that. But it's so important. I mean, we've got really good historical evidence. Why don't they ever talk about it?
It seems that if you're in church, the pastor is supposed to automatically assume that you have all these questions answered. And you know what? Even some of us that have been Christians for 50 some years, i.e. myself, I still have questions, and I want to know why, and to offer that explanation why, and to assure people that we do have good reasons for believing in a lot of these things, it should be helpful to our faith. But yet, it seems that we have to kind of go outside the walls of the church to get teaching about why and what the historic facts are.
And that's extremely unfortunate. There is a man named Gary Habermas, and he has spent his entire life working on the resurrection, and he's a historian of the resurrection. And so he's got several really fantastic presentations. I'll put a link up here, and then I'll put it to the end where you can see him summarize basically his life's work. And his tactic is to take all of the historical data that the vast majority of historians believe and then argue from there. So he's not just taking the Bible and saying it's true because the Bible tells me so. He's saying, okay, what is the data about Jesus and the resurrection that your secular and non-secular historians believe, and let's talk about the resurrection from that. So if someone were just to ask you, just give one point, why should I believe that a dead man came back to life when I've never seen it happen? Why is that reasonable for me to believe?
Mm-hmm. Are you asking me that?
I know I've actually, I don't know if you, I just told him we were making this video right now, so I didn't give him any time to prepare or anything. Do you remember any of the points of the minimal facts argument?
Oh, yeah. Yes, of course.
Okay, so give us just one, or maybe we can go back and forth. What's one that you remember if someone just said, how can I believe in that?
Okay, so there's a historic method of research. And when people of today, historians, when they go back in time to try to figure out, well, what about Julius Caesar? What do we know about him? We never met him. We don't have any current books that he wrote back then that is still here with us. We do have. What do we have? So they go back and they say, well, here's a guy that wrote about him, and here's somebody else that wrote about him, and we just dug up this stone and it says something about Julius Caesar on it. So they look at all that kind of stuff and they say, okay, what evidence do we have? Well, if you take Jesus, the first thing that they're going to agree with using this method of inquiry is they're going to say, okay, was Jesus a man? Did he really live? Mm-hmm. And the vast majority of people believe that that's true. Now, back when I was a kid in the 50s, there were people that said, well, Jesus never lived. In fact, there are still a few today.
A few.
But it's...
Not many.
But
and we're talking historians. We're talking people that have gone to school, have their PhD, study all of these guys are trained on how to interpret the data we have around history. And 90, I hate to throw out a percent, but it's a virtual consensus that Jesus lived.
Right. And so then Gary would ask the next question as, what do we know about Jesus? What did he do? Was he crucified?
Mm-hmm.
And the conclusion of the historians is yes, he was crucified.
Mm-hmm.
And then, well, did he die on the cross? Was he really dead? And again, the historians agree that he died on the cross, that he was dead. And so then they ask the question, well, what about this empty tomb business?
Mm-hmm.
And again, historians agree that there was an empty tomb. Now, at this point, the believers from the non-believers separate.
Mm-hmm.
And why was he missing? What, did he rise from the dead? Well, that's a question that a Christian is going to say yes, and the non-Christian is going to say, I've never known of anybody that raised from the dead, so I'm going to assume
Mm-hmm.
they didn't, that
Yeah.
there's some other explanation. And so then they would ask the question, well, where'd the church come from? Why do you have all these people out there preaching that Jesus rose from the dead?
Mm-hmm.
And why, on the day of Pentecost, which was a Jewish holiday, why did 3,000 people become saved and believe in Jesus? And, well, why? And, well, it's because these scared little guys, 12 apostles, but all of a sudden changed their mind and started preaching that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they can, what Gary Habermas has done and others is they've gone back and they've followed certain statements that the church had said in the first century. And one of those statements is to say, Christ is risen. And you say, Christ is risen indeed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's an old time, and we still say it today. And there are various other statements of faith that people in the first century said, and they can trace this teaching of the resurrection clear back to within what?
Some people say within 3 months, definitely within a year. Back to I'm going to give the quick framework of the argument. And if you want to hear the details, there's a whole hour presentation where you hear Gary Habermas go through this whole minimal facts argument in the history we have. He can surely explain it much better than we can. But so historians agree a man named Jesus lived. Historians agree a man named Jesus was crucified. Historians believe that there was an empty tomb. Historians believe that the followers of Jesus claim to have seen him and went out preaching that this had taken place, and that many of them gave their life for this belief that they actually interacted with a man named Jesus who died and was resurrected. You've got a man named Paul who persecuted Christians that claimed to see Jesus and changed his life. You got the brother of Jesus who did not believe that he was the Son of God until he interacted with him as he was resurrected. So this is all of the information that is just generally accepted among non-secular and secular and non-secular historians. So the point is that there is historical evidence that this event took place. So when you are a Christian and you're believing in the resurrection, it's not something that you have to do on blind faith alone. Now, a lot of those historians that still do believe in these facts still don't come to the conclusion that there was a resurrection because they've never seen one and they're coming from a naturalistic point of view and they don't believe in miracles. But there is absolute, really good evidence that this took place. And to me, for me personally, the strongest piece of evidence is the disciples going out and proclaiming it and dying for it. They died for saying, no, I saw this. I saw this man. The early church was proclaiming this took place. Like he mentioned, it was between 3 months and a year after we know that the church and all of the people that believed in Jesus were claiming that he had risen from the dead. So this isn't something that was a legend that started 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. It happened right at the point of the crucifixion where people were saying, yes, this did indeed happen. Right. And we hit this really, really fast. These are just little bullet points. If you want to see the whole presentation, like we said with Gary Habermas, go and look at it. But the point is that there is evidence that this took place, and you don't just have to take it on some kind of magical faith, although faith is certainly still required to come to the conclusion that, we've never seen anyone come to life. That's a pretty miraculous thing.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more data for it than what you may know if you haven't looked into it.
The difference between the Christian and the non-Christian is the Christian says, if God exists, then if he created the universe, then he can do miraculous things. The non-Christian says, I don't believe in God, therefore I don't believe that there's any miraculous things that are done. And so it's what your starting assumption is. Is it possible or is it not? And on the Christian side, it's like, well, there's a whole lot about science even that I don't understand. And so should I understand how God did all this stuff? Well, we understand more and more each day, but it's not up to me to assume that God couldn't do those things.
Well, thank you guys. I hope you've had a wonderful Easter, and just know that the faith that you have in Jesus and his resurrection on this day is not crazy to believe. It's perfectly reasonable considering the evidence that we have and considering how Jesus has probably worked in your life and in our lives and is all around us. So hopefully we'll be putting out more videos. A few days we'll be having that COVID-19 video coming out that we just recorded. Any last thing you want to say?
Christ is risen.
He's risen indeed. All right. Thanks, guys.